Hi everyone, I'm Maggie McGrath, senior editor at Forbes. On Sunday in Boulder, Colorado, a man attacked a gathering of people who were trying to raise awareness for Israeli hostages in Gaza. 8 people were injured, and the attacker, who yelled "Free Palestine," was charged on Monday with a federal hate crime. Joining us to discuss this incident is Jonathan Greenblatt. He is the CEO and National Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Jonathan, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start off by saying I saw the ADL statement, your statement that you put out in response to this incident, but what has the last 24 hours been like for you and your organization? What have you been doing?
Well, in many ways, it has really been a whirlwind. I mean, it has been nonstop as we've tried to understand the state of the victims. Our team of analysts were identifying the perpetrator. I was on the line with the governor and the AG and other elected officials, community members. But unfortunately, even though it's been sort of a whirlwind, it's also very familiar. I mean, think about it. Literally a week and a half ago, we had the shooting outside the Capitol Jewish Museum. 2 individuals, a young couple, were shot dead. They were, gunned down from behind. More than 20 shots were fired by the assailant, who, as he killed them, said, this was for Gaza and free Palestine. And then almost 6 weeks to the day, the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, his home was firebombed in the middle of the night by a man who tried to set it ablaze because of the governor's, quote, position on Palestine. Now, look, he's the governor of Pennsylvania. He doesn't have a position on Palestine. And elderly people walking around a park in Boulder, Colorado, have nothing to do with foreign policy issues. But we have seen relentless, unending incitement against Jewish people, relentless, unending dehumanization of Zionists, relentless, unending demonization of the Jewish state. And it creates the conditions in which all Jews, anyone who supports the state of Israel, is suddenly fair game. And so I think while this, again, feels familiar to me because I have seen this movie before, I am angry that it continues to be on replay. And I am furious that Jews can't feel safe walking through a park, sleeping in their home, attending an event at a museum, which, by the way, was about how to increase humanitarian aid to Gaza. I mean, I don't think prejudice is ever political. It's just profane, and it needs to be stopped now.
In your statement, you note that the ADL has been documenting terrorist attacks on Jews, Zionists, or Jewish institutions, and there were 16, and 9 of those occurred within the past 12 months. How does that compare historically? Because I've been seeing among contacts and acquaintances on social media a reflection of what you just said. They're saying, I am Jewish. I have never been more fearful to be Jewish in America right now. Is that a common refrain among the people that you talk to on a day-to-day basis?
Maggie, it is absolutely a common refrain. Now, look, the Jewish people are tough. We have endured inquisitions and pogroms and persecutions and, the Shoah, so much stuff over thousands of years, and yet we're still here. So I want to be clear that we're not daunted. We're not going to be, terrorized. And yet, Jewish Americans are asking themselves, is it safe for my kid to go to college? Or is he going to be exposed, for example, to the kind of rant that we saw happen at the MIT graduation just a few days ago, where the speaker did this blood libel about Israel and MIT? It was insane. Am I going to be safe, again, walking in public spaces? But it's interesting, Maggie, because it's not just a Jewish problem here in America. In the last 72, 96 hours, we've seen synagogues, kosher restaurants, Jewish businesses, a Holocaust museum vandalized with pro-Palestine graffiti in Paris. We saw Jewish youth on the tube in London assaulted. We saw calls to kill all Jews, graffiti in Brisbane, Australia. So this is like a global campaign against the Jewish people, again, under the pretext under the kind of rationale that somehow events in the Middle East make Jewish people legitimate targets. But I'm sorry, whether you're an innocent person dragged out of their home, imprisoned, starved, and tortured in Gaza, or you're a Jewish middle schooler who is serially harassed and bullied right here in America, none of it is okay. And we need people on all sides, Maggie, political, business, houses of worship. We need Americans from all walks of life to stand up and say, enough. We are not going to tolerate this behavior anymore, because it's not only anti-Semitic, although it is, and it's not only anti-Zionist, it's anti-American to single out a group of people and to hold them collectively responsible for policies that you don't like on the other side of the world.
We'll get into what individuals can do in this moment a little later into this conversation, but first I want to get your reaction to what some on the right are characterizing as an immigration issue when they talk about what happened in Boulder. President Trump said the perpetrator, quote, came in through Biden's ridiculous open border policy, which has hurt our country badly. He must go out. End quote. And then he did go on to express concern for the victims, I should note. But what do you make of the calls on the right that are focusing on the perpetrator and his immigration status?
Okay, so there are a couple things here, if I might. I mean, first and foremost, being here in America is not a right, if you will, it's a privilege. And if you overstay your visa, if you file a visa under false pretenses, or you commit other acts of such that are, criminal in nature, there's every reason in the world to deport you. Again, I don't think everyone just gets to walk into the United States of America. I think you apply and you get in legally. The way my wife did, she came here as a political refugee. The way my grandparents did, they came here as refugees from Europe. I have no problem with that. And I do have a problem with people coming from whatever country it may be and importing toxic ideologies. It's bad enough that Qatar is pumping propaganda into our bloodstream through Al Jazeera day and night. It's bad enough that the Islamic Republic and its proxies, like Hamas, are using their platforms, if you will, to inflame things on our college campuses and to further poison the public dialogue. All of that is bad. But there's another point I want to make here. This issue isn't really a right or left. It's right and wrong. I remember, Maggie, 2018, there was all of this demonization of immigrants. And Robert Bowers, this individual in Pittsburgh, posted on Gab. He'd been so radicalized, so been driven and inflamed. He said, screw your optics, I'm going in. And he took his automatic weapon and went to the Tree of Life synagogue and murdered 11 people in cold blood. And now we have these assailants further being inflamed and radicalized with online content, attacking, again, Jews in Boulder, or perceived Jewish people in Washington, D.C., or in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And so I feel like this moment is one that we've seen before. So if you are of the political left and you criticized, Robert Bowers and what the right did in that time, you ought to be speaking up now, forcefully. And if you're not, shame on you. Shame on you if you only speak out when it's politically convenient. And by the same token, folks on the right who are standing up and speaking out today, making claims about whatever the case may be, I'm glad, again, they're speaking out. But if they didn't speak out after Pittsburgh or Poway, shame on them. Anti-Semitism and bigotry of all kinds isn't justified because it happens to be coming from people of your political persuasion. All of it needs to be condemned unequivocally, unambiguously, whenever and wherever it happens.
As we talk about the rise of anti-Semitism in America and the increase of violent acts against Jewish people, I'm curious, Jonathan, do you think the federal government is doing enough to prevent these attacks and protect the Jewish community?
That's a great question. Look, I will tell you, in my tenure here at ADL, we have always had excellent collaboration with the federal government. We had it under President Obama, and then President Trump, and then President Biden, now President Trump again. The FBI and the DOJ broadly have always worked with us. I would like to make sure they're tackling all forms of extremism, right? I felt like there wasn't enough emphasis on the kind of anti-Zionist extremism coming from the perceived political left under the Biden years. And I worry a little bit about making sure there's enough attention on political extremism from the far right, the white supremacist armed militia folks now. But we've always had good collaboration. But I will tell you one thing that they could do. I am very concerned about how the media, mainstream media and social media, has contributed to this crisis. Look, mainstream news outlets, not like Forbes, but like the main 24/7 news network, particularly like CNN and NBC and the BBC in particular, always had standards and practices about when they showed images, for example, of children wounded or killed in conflict. And look, you don't see pictures of wounded children in Russia or the Ukraine. You never see pictures of wounded children in Yemen or the Sudan. You never saw them in Iraq. But suddenly in Gaza, that is all that we see. I mean, I don't remember the BBC quoting the ISIS Ministry of Health in Syria, and yet it happens all the time at the Hamas Ministry of Health. I don't remember, CNN quoting the Taliban's Administration for Children's Services during the war in Afghanistan, but they do it all the time in Gaza. So I feel like these networks have made some kind of decision to authorize displaying the kind of content that previously was off limits. And like, why should we be surprised that Hamas propaganda inflames and radicalizes people? So I really think the mainstream news networks need to demonstrate some accountability here for helping to create the conditions in which Jews are being targeted in America or around the world. And then the social media companies, the social media platforms who algorithmically amplify the worst content that is literally encoded to enrage people and radicalize. I don't understand why Instagram and Facebook and X don't treat this content like they would, copyright infringed content. Try to post something that's an infringement of, again, some copyright. It'll come down so fast your head will spin. But pictures of dead babies, false claims by Hamas, they literally go around the world in seconds. So if we try to understand how we got to this place, again, our media landscape, the mainstream media, which seems to have forfeited any sense of judgment and just abandoned their standards, and the new media companies who continue to amplify and expand the reach of this toxicity, they have to answer some hard questions. And I would love to see, it's overdue to see the federal government, the administration, and Congress hold them accountable once and for all.
What do you think accounts for that double standard that you just cited between images from Gaza versus images from Ukraine, for instance?
It is shocking and it is unmistakable. I think what accounts for it is that you've seen, we talk a lot about what's happening on college campuses, Maggie, and you see the radicalization of these schools, which didn't happen overnight. It's happened over years. And let me tell you something, the activists, hiding their identities behind scarves and keffiyehs and masks and whatnot, frothing at the mouth, vandalizing university property, taking over buildings, harassing and terrorizing their classmates. These activists, they're not going to Goldman Sachs, Maggie. They're not going to go to the kind of public companies that that Fortune covers. Where do you think they're going to go? They're going to go to not to Goldman Sachs, but they end up in, I don't know, your kid's middle school teaching social studies, or they end up, working in media. So I do think part of the problem is the radicalization of a younger generation, activists who, again, Maggie, I'm not talking about what happens at Forbes. I want to be clear. But activists who think their job is not to be journalists covering an issue, it's to be advocates driving a narrative. And they end up, again, in new and old media companies, and they have biased and warped things. I see this all the time. I see this not just in, the channels that you can find on cable TV. We see it in Wikipedia. Again, we see it in places like TikTok. It is astonishing how people like Hassan Piker and Guy Christensen are somehow the arbiters of information today for a younger generation. So I think that radicalism has altered the media landscape in ways that are not fact-based, but in ways that simply drive a political position, even one steeped and seething with racism and bigotry.
As you talk about the radicalization of these issues, I'm thinking about the event at the Israeli embassy, which you said was to raise funds or awareness for the humanitarian initiatives in Gaza.
Let's clarify. So the event that took place about a week and a half ago was at the Capitol Jewish Museum, which is a non-political entity. That's literally a museum that talks about Jewish life in Washington, D.C. over centuries. Now, there were a lot of people there, including representatives of like the diplomatic corps and young people. There were Jewish and non-Jewish people there. And this assailant, Elias Rodriguez from Chicago, affiliated with the Party of Socialism and Liberation, a radical, like extreme left-wing organization. He attended the event. I'm not sure how he knew about it, to be frank, although it was publicized. And he waited outside. And essentially, when people exited the building, again, this young couple, whose probably only offense, Maggie, was they were holding hands as they left the museum, he shot them in the back and discharged nearly 24 shots. We know from witnesses that he didn't immediately kill the young woman. And as she tried to crawl away, he continued to shoot her, this defenseless woman. I mean, it's a tragedy, and it makes me retch. It makes me retch that this man was able to do that. But so I think one of the ways that that shooting has been characterized is Israeli embassy staffers. That man, Elias Gonzalez, Rodriguez, did not know who they were. He did not know they worked for the embassy. The only thing he knew is that they were attending an event at the Capitol Jewish Museum to learn about, again, how to increase humanitarian aid to Gaza. So their offense wasn't working for the Israeli embassy. Their offense wasn't their political position. Their only offense was he believed they were Jewish. And as he told the police after he was apprehended, quote, "I did it for Gaza." And the idea that someone would be so radicalized that they would think that murdering civilians is a gift for Gaza is stunning. But what's even more staggering is we have seen pro-Hamas groups here in the United States since the attack praising Rodriguez, elevating him as some kind of martyr, and talking about, quote, "bring the war home." But unfortunately, you see, that's their whole point, Maggie, when they say globalize the intifada, or decolonization is not a metaphor, or by any means necessary. They are legitimizing, rationalizing a kind of violence. And it's a violence rooted in racism that holds all Jewish people guilty, that believes anyone with a Zionist kind of impulse is guilty, that any individual associated with the state of Israel is guilty. And that kind of blanket bigotry, that kind of raw, unrepentant racism is a curse, and it's a poison, and it's the kind of thing we need to expunge. And now let me be clear, like I have no problem with having heated conversations about events in the Middle East. I have no problem with having fact-based, robust debate, intense, zealous debate about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. None at all. But what I would never do, and what I never will do, is to legitimize or validate violence. It is unacceptable, whether or not you are targeting Asian Americans because you're angry about what's happening, with the Wuhan flu, quote unquote, as we saw at the start of COVID. It was wrong when people were targeting Latinos who were believed to be immigrants, if you will, back in the early years of the first Trump administration. And it is absolutely, positively, fundamentally wrong today.
Very important points. And where I was actually going with that question, I got the venue wrong, and I do apologize. I said embassy when I did mean Capitol Jewish Museum, is that was a holistic event meant to talk about humanitarian aid. And I imagine that there's a Venn diagram of people who are concerned about the humanitarian issues and who are also deeply concerned about the rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic attacks against our Jewish friends, family, and neighbors, who feel a little bit hamstrung whenever they go to talk about this publicly. They might feel that it's a hard needle to thread. Do you or the ADL have a position on how to hold both of these truths equally?
Look, it's an interesting question, Maggie. If you wanted an example of an organization that will criticize positions or policies of the Israeli government and do it in a way that is not anti-Semitic, or that doesn't incite violence, or that doesn't hold all Jewish people responsible, I hope your viewers will take down this URL, because I know this is a website you can check out to learn more. It's adl.org. And I say that not to be kind of tongue-in-cheek, but there is this fiction that you can't criticize Israel without being called anti-Semitic. We do it all the time. And I would argue that there is no issue more hotly debated on our op-ed pages or on cable news or on social media than the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I mean, just look at, the United Nations, look at the NGOs. It is debated every single day, far more than at least empirically speaking, more urgent humanitarian crises, like the Sudan would be an example, or far more, or Syria, by the way, which I alluded to earlier. Think about how many people, hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of people, were butchered and murdered by the Assad regime and then by ISIS in Syria. And yet it got nowhere near the coverage that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict gets every day. Or again, the civil war in Syria or the civil war in Ethiopia. I mean, I could go on. So I only make the point because I think there is not likely a more hotly debated topic in our country today vis-a-vis foreign policy than this one. But it is a fiction. It is a lie that's perpetrated that, oh, you can't speak about it without being called anti-Semitic. I mean, it's just not true. There are plenty of people who do it every day. But what we won't do at ADL, again, we may criticize policy of the Israeli government, but what we won't do is delegitimize the Jewish state, is demonize anyone who happens to be affiliated with it, is dehumanize people because they're Israeli. And anyone who would do those things or hold the Jewish state to double standards that you don't hold the other countries to, Maggie, that's what gets our attention. So when, again, you delegitimize the very notion of the state in a way you don't any other country on the planet, when you demonize all Israelis, civilians and children and elderly, etc., and when you hold the country to double standards you don't apply to other nations, that's when it seems to us at ADL, maybe there's something else going on. Maybe it's not actually legitimate criticism of the country. Maybe it's something more like anti-Semitism.
We've talked about what the federal government can do. We've talked about what individuals can do. I want to end by asking, do you have any final thoughts or calls to action to the Forbes community, which includes entrepreneurs, CEOs, and business leaders?
Look, I appreciate, I'm a reader and a longtime fan, so I appreciate Forbes. I think the best thing you can do if you're watching this today and you say, how can I help? Call a Jewish friend. Ask them to take you to a rally for the hostages. Ask a Jewish neighbor or colleague, coworker, or again, family member, fraternity brother or sorority sister, or someone in your life who happens to be Jewish. Just reach out to them and say, hey, I'm thinking about you today. How can I be helpful? How can I show up for you? Really, Maggie, if people would just start by showing up, picking up the phone, sending a text message, or even engaging someone, face to face, it goes a very long way for a community, the Jewish community right now, that's hurting. And they're hurting for good reason. But the healing process, the Jewish people won't do it on their own. We'll only do it when we come together. And I think there's nothing more American, if you will, than people across lines of faith or ethnicity or political persuasion coming together to be with each other. That's what ultimately we all want.
Jonathan Greenblatt, CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, thank you so much for sitting down with Forbes. We really appreciate your time and your insight.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much.